Hi, everyone. My name is Manasi Samant. I'm a pulmonologist at Northwestern. Thank you guys so much for joining our webinar today. We have some excellent panelists who are going to talk about kind of their experience in industry, the transition from academics to industry. So hopefully we'll get to learn a lot, and please stop and ask questions along the way. This is intended to be an interactive session. If you think of anything at any point, either put it in the chat or you're welcome to sort of unmute and ask the question at any time. So our panelists today, so first we have Dr. Fairs. He did his pulmonary and critical care fellowship at UNC, practiced at Yale University, and moved over to the industry realm in 2018 to do clinical trials. He's currently the head of orphan lung diseases in the therapeutic area at Mankind. Dr. Nelson currently leads global medical affairs for United Therapeutics. He's a PharmD from the University of Texas at Austin and did a drug development fellowship from UNC at Chapel Hill. And he's been in the pharmaceutical industry for over 20 years. Dr. McDowell has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 15 years, where she's held various roles in medical affairs. Most of her experience is with small biotech companies within the therapeutic areas of pulmonary and cardiovascular diseases, and especially pulmonary hypertension. She holds a PharmD degree and completed an advanced practice residency, and she's currently the Senior Director of Medical Affairs at Gossamer Bio. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Appreciate you
Yeah,
guys being
happy to be here.
Thank you. Glad to be
Thank
here.
you. Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first section is meant to sort of be um, uh, it's supposed to explore how to partner with industry while you're currently in academics to accelerate your research. And so the first question is, and this can be for any of you guys, what are some effective strategies for scientists to partner with industry for investigator-initiated research?
So I think it's important to,
I think you might be muted.
No, I can hear Leanne.
no, I don't think I'm muted.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Should I go? Somebody else want to go?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. I think it's important to leverage your industry relationships, especially within medical affairs or clinical development, and have discussions to ascertain the types of research that the company might be willing to financially support. This usually progresses into, a preliminary discussion. If these are of interest to the company, they'll request submission of a study concept with supporting documentation, maybe a proposed budget, and proof of your qualifications. And then from there, if we feel that there could be merit to your concept, then we'll request a full protocol. That's reviewed via committee, and then it's either approved or not. But the investigator-initiated program, research program is a nice way to partner.
Yeah, if I may add to that, if we step back a little bit, at least when I was before joining industry was not clear to me, and I didn't really appreciate the difference between the different functions or departments within industry in general. For example, medical affairs, clinical development, sales, marketing. So this is, I think, and then to figure out whom to talk to at different companies to figure this out. So this is one point which I believe is important to appreciate. The other one is that knowing more about the company, because there are differences in resources between big pharma and smaller companies, whether medium-sized companies or startups, and their ability first having data to share, to analyze, for example, having resources to support that. It may be different from one company to the other. And really, most importantly, it is what kind of research and what your interests are. It could be analysis of a data set, for example, and then publishing associations or correlations related to that. I mentioned that specific example because I personally did that when I was in academia. I applied to United Therapeutics. They had multiple very rich data sets, and we did some analysis and we published that. So that's one example to do that. Another example, I applied to Gilead at some point for funding to collect and analyze biomarkers from patients. So, and figuring out, do you want like a basic science support kind of research? Do you want to support the two similar examples, the two that I just gave, or do you want to contribute to large randomized control trials and then be an investigator there? So there are different ways to do that. The key thing is having an open conversation with your medical affairs contact at whatever, and at different companies. It doesn't have to be Synchrony, just to see what capabilities and resources that specific company may provide, just to figure out if it's worth it to go through a submission of whatever research idea you may have.
Yeah, nothing much to add there. I think you guys hit it. There's a lot of, it's really understanding what the company's kind of interests are. Like most will post their kind of interest areas on their website. We do that for ours. If you have an idea with that falls in line with those, or even outside of those, but closely related, it's worth a submission. It gets your name known to the individuals that are reviewing those things and shows that you're interested in doing that type of research. I would definitely get in touch with your local MSL in the area who can kind of point you to that portal in our case, or any other way to kind of get that information in, and they can kind of walk you through that process. But the key is, as Wasim mentioned, is kind of understanding what the interests are of the company are. You'll have a greater chance of getting something approved by doing that.
Is there an easy, sorry, is there a bad echo?
There is an echo, yes.
Okay. I'm just gonna try calling in again, but I'm gonna put my question in the chat.
The question in the chat is there an easy way to tell which companies have which grants? Yeah, I think so. I mean, in certain cases, we list what our interests are on our website, and there's probably 15 different topics on there. I don't know how Gossamer or Mankind do it, but I feel like that's a pretty common approach to kind of list what the interests are of kind of the medical teams, and that you would have a much favorable review if you submit something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, is the website. I mean, we only have right now in development, so and it's a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, but anything that might be of value around that is something that we would be interested in, certainly.
Yes, exactly that. So the easy way is really to go through the companies that are in whichever space you are. I mean, if it is pulmonary hypertension, you just go through the handful or whatever companies that are doing pulmonary hypertension, just check each of their websites. At Mankind, we're not in that therapeutic area, so we wouldn't have investigator-initiated studies in pulmonary hypertension, but we're working on other therapeutic areas. But when I was at the Merck MSD, we update them every year, and we have a budget for those, and they are on the company's website. Okay. So maybe we can keep going.
Yeah, there's another question that was posted on.
Oh,
Our host is having AV issues,
yeah.
looks like. So I'll read the other question for you guys. Are there common mistakes scientists make when partnering with the industry? I have some thoughts on that. Do you want me to go first?
Please.
if you're talking about partnering with the industry from an investigator initiated, we'll take that as an example right now. But I do think some young investigators tend to propose very, very ambitious goals. And that's admirable from one perspective, but usually ends up being something that they cannot finish or complete in a reasonable amount of time. And then for any subsequent submissions, you always kind of have that first submission or first research project in mind, where it's like, did they actually finish what they said they were going to do? And I think beyond having the very best or most robust proposal, it's something that you can actually finish and complete and knock out of the park in a reasonable amount of time to show that you can do that research. I think that's where some you know, fresh out of fellowship training, people that submit these grants kind of run into some issues there.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Andrew. I think it's important to not try to take on more than you think you can really complete. Because, we want to make sure, and there's always milestones written in to these projects. You want to be able to meet those milestones within the amount of time that in between your regular work that you're doing every day. This can be a big undertaking, whether you have a group of people that you're working with or not, behind you. And I think it also is important to partner with companies where you truly feel you can contribute your expertise or contribute something where there may be something that they're looking for. Maybe there's a gap somewhere in the literature around their drug molecule or what they've already discovered with that product. It's important and this all gets vetted, but I have to agree with Andrew, is not taking on something so big that you can't meet your milestones, finish it, get something valuable and worthy that you can publish.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The one other thing I would say, not necessarily a mistake, but a misconception that many people have, that when you're dealing with whether investigator-initiated studies or other kinds of research, again, not to mix the scientists and the pharmaceutical companies or biotechs with the sales and marketing team. There are firewalls that separate these. So many of us who are in the industry are really committed to science, advancing patient care and to patients. So it's I would say it's more a misconception more so than a mistake that people do.
Great, thank you guys. And hopefully my AV issues are sorted out. I had to switch to a different computer, so I think we're good now. But my next question was, so clinical trials are a common place where scientists partner with industry. How can a new investigator, especially someone who's early on in their career, sort of invite these partnerships to their center if there's not already someone more senior collaborating with industry?
I'm happy to start. So the process, like when we're doing a large trial, when we go through sites selection, we do like feasibility assessments. There are certain criteria that are really required before we can have a site and be part of a large clinical trial. Obviously, a motivated investigator is great, and it's a requirement, but we need a lot more than that. We need an infrastructure at that site. So an individual by themselves, regardless of how passionate or motivated they are for the trial, again, it's great, but it's not enough. We need to make sure the section, the department is supporting clinical research at that institution and supporting that practically with resources, with a study coordinator, the IRB process, how long does it take? Are there enough resources there? So this is a big part of it. The other part of it is having the patient population at that site or center, whether academic or a large community, center that they do have the patient population, both on the clinical side, to feed into clinical trials for enrollment. So that's all part of the feasibility that we do when we select sites. The experience of the investigator is important. And again, to your question, if someone is relatively new, junior, I mean, that's still perfectly fine. It's always a plus if they have never been an investigator before, like if they served as a sub-investigator, for example, or if they have the support and mentorship locally at the site of someone who has served as an investigator. Again, to ensure that the training and experience of that junior individual, they grow up to be great investigators. They keep a good eye on the quality of the execution of the trial at that site. So these are the different aspects that we look at. So to specifically answer your question, just make sure first you have patient population for a trial, make sure you secure resources internally for the processes, research infrastructure, and make sure you have the support of a senior mentor or investigator who would even serve as a sub-investigator at the trial, even if they're more experienced than that.
Yeah, sub-I is a great way to get started in that realm. The only thing I would add to that comprehensive response that Wasim just provided is that not all trials are created equally either. So you can do a very complex phase 2 or phase 3 placebo-controlled, randomized, multiple arm study, and that can be fairly complex, even for the PI that's participating in it, with very detailed inclusion-exclusion criteria. On the other end of the spectrum is like a registry study, where it's a lot of passive data collection and some involvement, may not be a lot of involvement from the whole gamut of research professionals that are at a center. So you could get involved in an easier type study like that to kind of get your feet wet, prove yourself as a PI at a site, and then move on to kind of phase 2 and 3 studies that are sometimes a little bit more complex. So just to add.
Well, I think that if you're a new investigator and you may not be as well known to people in the industry, and you want to invite these types of partnerships to your center, I think the first place to really start is to develop and maintain relationships with industry colleagues, especially in medical affairs. These are partners like myself and Wasim and Andrew, who, we're highly trained. We have, a high science or a significant clinical medical background. So these are the people that you begin to have these deep discussions with around the company's preclinical data or the drug molecule itself and any future plans that they have for different trials and beyond. And then, we kind of discuss your level of interest in participating, and then it goes into, do you have the patient population? Do you have the infrastructure at your clinic or your site? Do you have competent study coordinators or enough study coordinators? And, are you familiar with the process of working with a contract research organization? Things like that. I think, when we vet a site or we're vetting somebody that's, a little bit newer, we want to ensure that, they have an understanding of the things that they're going to need, but also we understand, that they have the background. Maybe they've, as a fellow, took a deep interest, or they've, helped to publish some things. It's a kind of a conglomerate of many things that go into it.
No, that's great. That's very helpful information. And you guys have already kind of touched on this a little bit, but outside of these trials, what are some other opportunities for new investigators to partner with industry to support or accelerate their research? I know we talked about applying for grants and then, becoming a sub-I, but are there any sort of avenues that investigators could explore?
Yes, there's quite a few of them. So we've touched on investigator-initiated studies, submit your idea, kind of in line with the company, talk to your MSL about being interested in clinical research, prove that you have the infrastructure. You can participate that way. At least at our company, we have a couple other ways. Wasim actually mentioned this because he made a submission to us back when he was an academic, for our data query program, which is basically we put all our data into and other companies do this as well, into like a consolidated data set that we allow clinicians to ask questions towards it. That kind of, if you have a research question, you've read the pivotal study, you have access to the data, you can ask your own question towards that. That kind of builds and establishes that relationship between the medical personnel at the company and you as a clinician that's interested in learning about this. And from there, you can kind of work on the answer to that question. Usually turns into like a publication or an abstract or something like that. But it really is a lot of times the first time that we really work with a lot of newer clinicians is in that realm where somebody just has a good idea and we just want to help them bring that to publication. The other thing that our company.
Sorry,
Yeah,
or can I just ask a question about that specific avenue? Is that usually just initiated by the investigator speaking to the MSL locally? Is that done through, an application process, or how is that done?
Yeah, I mean, it usually begins with just a conversation with the MSL. We do have a formal application process to that to see if we even have that data available. We've gotten a number of requests that it's like, oh, that would have been great if we collected that bit of information, and unfortunately we don't have it. But a lot of times we do have it, and we go back and we have a statistician. We have statisticians on our team that are partnered with that clinician, and they will run the statistical analysis plan, the SAS code, and then they will kind of put out the results, and then together the groups will review the findings and decide what to do with it. Is it worthy of a publication or not? The other way that we try to get kind of clinicians interested in pulmonary vascular research in particular is we have a small grants program that has a research committee that reviews these things. It's not investigator-initiated research. It's an independent group. We call it the Genesis Awards, but it's basically a small awards program where you can make submissions to get, usually it's pilot data for somebody that's looking to kind of continue their research in this area. Pilot data that'll support an R01 grant or a K grant or something like that, or is it just some initial data to kind of kickstart their research efforts there. But that's something that we, and I know Gilead used to have one of these programs. I'm not sure who else still has these programs. Bayer, I think, used to, but just kind of like a young investigator program to kind of invest in that type of research.
I don't really have anything to add there. I think that that's a really good point that Andrew made about the Young Investigator Awards. If companies have those, they're fairly generous and they're a really nice place to begin. They usually give out more than one, and there's an application process, and there's a committee that looks through the different research proposals and then determines what they want to fund. Those are really nice programs. There's also, just lending your expertise, perhaps getting involved in projects that we're already working on. Maybe you're working on, something that's related, that you can bring to, what we're already doing.
The only one thing to add is just to repeat what we said earlier. There's variability in what the companies offer. So what Andrew and Leanne mentioned, this is not necessarily the standard at every company. So some companies, like even when they have finished phase 3, phase 4 registry study, they're not necessarily opening it up for investigators to query them. And it goes back to the importance of having a good relationship with your MSL. I know this was already mentioned, but really started to see if there's a good fit or a good match between investigators' interests and questions they want to answer versus what the company may be able to offer and what avenues they may have internally.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Does anyone have any questions about just partnering with industry in general? I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about transitioning careers into industry, but I wanted to open up the forum for anyone who had questions just about striking up relationship with industry, how to sort of advance your career academically and explore research with industry while remaining in academics.
I have a question. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Rodolfo Estrada. I have a quick question about this is mostly related to physician scientists who want to do research with industry. I'm just curious in the overall provider who's may or may not be as savvy or experienced with research. What are those avenues looking like for someone who's in practice and want to do great clinical practice? How do they relate in the best way with industry to achieve, you know, great practice and patient outcomes within their institution?
So if it's a research effort, again, we rely on someone like figuring out specifically what kind of research they want to do. Based on your question, it doesn't seem, for example, to be basic research or mechanistic kind of research. It seems more on the clinical practice side. So if it's purely clinical practice, then on the clinical side, it would be enrolling in clinical trials. So unless you want to do the analysis that we described before, analysis of data or biomarkers or even associations, whether it's spirometry with hemodynamics or clinical outcomes, you can also do that. I don't know if I answered your question or
Yeah,
if you had
let me
something else.
clarify. Let me make a big piece here. So I'm talking more about the settings, the sites that may not have capacity of doing research, or the providers who may or may not do research. How can those relate to industry when their primary objective may not be research, maybe more clinical work, as opposed to just doing relationship with the, you know, with the sales reps? What would be avenues of getting successful relationships with industry in the medical side if you're not doing research?
Well, I think there's other ways to collaborate. You know, you could be a speaker for the company. That's more of a commercially oriented type of effort, but you know, it also builds that partnership and builds that relationship where you become, you know, known. You're speaking at different places and different venues. Perhaps you're doing, you know, roundtables for others who would like to learn more about that therapeutic area, as well as treatment in that area. We actually, you know, utilize our experts to help us on the education side, because in rare disease, and you know, there needs to be more education oftentimes at the community level outside of expert centers. And so we oftentimes rely on physicians who have really good working knowledge and background and training to help us in that regard as well, trying to get people diagnosed sooner, and that requires a heightened awareness of that disease. And we rely on people to do that, on our experts they may not be participating in clinical trials, but they want to get involved, and so we try to utilize them where we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, like Leanne hit on a lot of the different ways that clinicians can work with industry in a non-research setting. I think one additional one is just internal education of even our medical employees. We bring clinicians in all the time to kind of like go through a topic or highlight a certain area, do a 1 hour kind of webinar with us to kind of bring us up to speed in a certain area. So those interests need to be known, and I think the best way to do that is through your MSL that you talk with, express that interest that you want to work in ways in the company, and this is kind of where your areas of expertise are, and if they align with something that the company's interested in, it could turn into something like that.
I think we have a hand raised.
Thank you.
I joined a bit late and sorry for perhaps a sort of ignorant question. If this may be, I'm an early career and just trying to get a sense of, when working with industry, and some of these grants seem to require a very specific percentage of time for research. How does that actually work kind of in practice? Is that something that's potentially negotiable? And like, how does one even sort of I guess, for lack of better words, like to prove that is the balance that you're sort of achieving at your practice. There was one grant, I think it was at United Therapeutics, that had mentioned something like 40% of your FTE should be research, and I wasn't sure how that actually looks in practice.
So, I mean, I can start again. I'm not sure about the percentage of time, just as far as, I mean, how the process works. I mean, if a company is investing in a research project, obviously there's first a committee to assess that, and the time allotted to the research is one factor out of many. But if the question is about the time specifically, again, the company needs some reassurance that whatever investment in science and in the researcher being made, that it will actually pay out. So probably that's where some of the requirements for dedication. It also depends on how big the project is. If it's 40% of the time, as you're referring to it, it must be a big project, basically a significant project. So the percentage of time and that would be requested for a specific project would be matched to the size of that project. I don't know, Leanne or Andrew, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I can add to that. I feel like every company does this differently. There may be a percentage of time requirement, as you're alluding to. I think that oftentimes it's more of a meeting the milestones. The grants have depending on the type of grant, whether it's an IIT or it's a purely investigator grant support, they're all a little bit different. I think that you have to really evaluate your own time constraints with what might be doable, feasible, and then maybe look accordingly at what is offered within the industry, different companies.
Yeah, nothing really to add there. I do think milestone based is you can for a lot of the projects that we do, it's like for the investigator initiated studies, there's a time frame by which these different milestones need to be hit that are pre-agreed upon when the contract's signed. So as long as those are hit, regardless of how much time you're spent doing it. I don't know who asked the question, but I think you may be referring to our Genesis Awards, the Young Investigator Awards program, because we're looking for people that are will dedicate time to research and science. I do think there was a percentage of time dedicated to research because there was a certain time, it's only a year grant, so we want to see a certain amount of progress occur within that year. So I think there was a research time, a dedicated or protected research time component to those grant submissions.
I see. Thank you so much.
Any other questions about just research in general and grants and partnering with industry? All right, great. So now we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about how to sort of make the transition into industry, if that's something that you're considering, leaving academics or whatever and joining industry. So could you guys tell us sort of what are some of the first steps that you can take if you're considering making the transition over to industry?
So
go ahead. Please go ahead, Leanne.
I would say that, you need to think about the type of role that you feel would be a good fit with respect to your training and experience, and really talking to industry colleagues, your medical colleagues in the field from various companies about the different roles across an organization, whether it's in medical affairs or clinical development or translational research, And then take a good look at the companies themselves, their leadership, their pipeline, what approved products they have, what they've published. Is that data impactful? Do you believe in the data? I mean, oftentimes if I'm concerned about a company's, data to date at that point, maybe they barely met their primary endpoint or the FDA wanted them to rework or redo a trial, that could be, maybe not a company that I have, faith in, especially if it's their only, molecule or product that they're working on. So I think it's just important to really do some homework, and the best people to do that homework with are the people that are already in the industry. And so talking with them and, asking as many questions as you can, and getting a feel or a sense for, different roles and responsibilities, and, even just the travel component. I know I travel quite a bit. I'm sure the others do as well. There's that to consider. I'm sure you both have other things to add, but those are my thoughts.
I agree. Really, the main thing is talk to people, as Leanne mentioned, attending a webinar like this one. And it goes back to an earlier comment we made. Not all companies are the same. Significant differences, even the different functions within a company. Industry it's also not for everyone. And it's always, I would say, greener on the other side, whether you're in academia or industry. But I would say most, not all people who made that transition never looked back from academia to industry, again, depending on what they ended up doing. My personal journey was, as mentioned earlier, I moved in 2018 from clinical practice and academia to industry. But I would say it was a gradual transition over years because I was consulting for companies. I was on speakers bureau for some of the companies. I was involved in some of the trial design discussions for some companies. So I thought I knew enough about it, but really I didn't know enough about it until after I transitioned. Leanne mentioned that travel piece. Again, depending on your role and which function you're in, you may have, if you're going to be like preclinical, for example, research, I don't expect much to travel there. You'll be in the lab, and usually it's a single location. If you're medical affairs, some roles in medical affairs, I mean, could be headquarter based, but many of them are field based. So you may be on the road a lot of times, typically domestically. If you're doing clinical development and you're doing international trials, you have travel to domestic sites, internal company meetings, conferences, but also international sites. So depending on your specific situation, whether you're okay having, could be from 20% to 60% travel. That's one consideration. The other consideration is really the stability of the job. In clinical practice, most of the time you can stay there long term. Same thing if you have an academic at a university academic job. Typically, you can even, depending on the institution, you can retire there. So there is, for the most part, with some exception, long-term stability in academia and practice. Not easy work, but still. In industry, many times the change is not predictable. One example I would give, when I started in industry, I started at Johnson & Johnson right after they acquired Actelion. Great experience. I'm very grateful for having worked there. But today, I mean, many of the colleagues I worked with, for example, they're not there anymore because the company decided to change direction or minimize investment in pulmonary hypertension, for example. So many times, whether the trial is negative, there's no more funding for what you do, there's restructuring, change direction. The company wants to focus on oncology or immunology, something unrelated to what you do. You may find yourself without a job, for example, and depending on the market, it may or may not be easy. I would say it's really never easy to find the right job at the right company. So there are some challenges there. And the other thing, don't expect, like if pulmonary hypertension as an example is what you have a passion for, what you like, what you want to do for the rest of your career, it's difficult to stay in that space for the rest of your career. In general, companies, either they have multiple therapeutic areas. Yes, experienced pulmonary hypertension is great, but you may want to also support the pulmonary fibrosis program or even outside of pulmonary. So depending on the company. So don't expect that you're going to stick to a single disease area when you move to industry. This is what's coming to mind now.
No, that's great. That's actually really an interesting insight to note that, oftentimes it's hard to sort of stay in the same field that you worked in clinically. You just talked about this, Dr. Ferris, but I was wondering if Dr. McDowell and Dr. Nelson could tell us a little bit about their initial experience making this transition, and if there was anything that any three of you would have done differently looking back now.
Well, I guess my story's a little bit different. I worked as right out of pharmacy school. I went over to a fellowship program in the industry in collaboration with UNC. So I started straight out in the industry. So I don't have any academic experience. My experience is just working with academics that have come over or have wanted to come over into the industry. So I can't really comment on your question, what I would have done differently.
So I came and I also entered the industry in a different way. I came from a clinical setting after doing a residency and a research fellowship. I was at the University of Pittsburgh Health System, over 20 hospitals in the health system, where I was pharmacy director of several of those hospitals. And so I had a variety of different responsibilities. And at some point, and I would say this, I wish I would have gotten into industry earlier in my career. I didn't realize how much I would actually love it. Just how challenging every day is different. As Wasim referred to, sometimes you're in a company, these smaller, nimble companies, they can be high risk, but they can also be high return. Versus, the big pharmaceutical companies that are a lot more stable, but there's a lot of layers, and your area may be phased out and you're asked to maybe go work in multiple sclerosis or something completely different from where you're at currently. So I actually, decided that at a certain point in time I wanted to move into industry, and really started talking to the people that were calling on me about jobs in the industry, and they kind of guided me a little bit. I also worked with a recruiter, not having, any industry experience, because it is a little bit difficult to kind of break into it when you're applying for positions where other people already have industry experience. But it's certainly not impossible, especially when you come with good credentials and good background and training. And I actually do quite a bit with helping others, who contact me and are interested in trying to get into industry. I actually enjoy helping them, guide them the way others did for me, because I think, it's important to help somebody get their first opportunity, especially if they don't have industry experience. So first, I would have done it a lot sooner than I did decide to do it. And I think that using any contacts that you have, and now that there's LinkedIn being so active, it wasn't back in my day, but making those connections and reaching out to some of those people is certainly helpful as well.
Great, thank you. Are there scenarios where if someone's not ready to make the leap completely over to industry, are there any scenarios in which you can sort of work in academics and in industry? And if there are there any sort of career implications to sort of still straddling both sides?
I've seen this done a couple times. I think the one of the issues is when you are working in the industry in the same therapeutic area that you're trying to practice in, there's too many compliance hurdles to kind of overcome, I would say, to try to make that situation work. But if you are doing something unrelated in the kind of the academic setting to where you're working in the industry, it makes it a lot easier. I will say that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, it could bring into, there could be conflicts of interest and the question of separation of confidential and proprietary company data from your own research. I mean, it could be, I think it can be done, but I think it can be difficult.
I agree. I would say during my fellowship, a couple of my attendings, actually, they would do fellows clinic only, for example, once a month, and they worked full-time in industry, and they would probably volunteer as a fellows clinic. And I know many physicians who still keep like half a clinic a month, a full day a month. I personally decided not to do that. First, due to the conflict of interest that's already mentioned. I mean, the way I thought about it, again, I joined J&J. I was leading the development of Messi at the same time. So, I mean, as a pulmonary hypertension physician, I mean, I wanted to use Messi. So that's as an example. So that's the potential conflict of interest there. So I decided let's not do that. Second, if you really want to build a career in industry, you need your full attention industry. Especially the first 2 years, probably much longer than that as well. It's a very steep learning curve. So need to focus on learning how industry works, working with the other functions, learning from the regulatory person, from the market access person, and having your clinic, I would say it would be distracting in a way. But the third reason that and again, it's a personal choice, I decided not to do that with the travel that we mentioned earlier. I didn't think it would be fair to my patients. If they need attention, going through something, yes, they can call whoever is on call. But if I'm traveling and I cannot really take care of them when they get sick, I thought it's really not fair to them. Let them be with someone who follows them throughout their journey. So the short answer, it's doable, and many people do that, but we just highlighted some of the caveats to that.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Earlier, you guys had mentioned that sometimes as companies get restructured or there's a decision to focus on a different area in medicine or therapeutics, your particular area of expertise might not be needed. How hard is it to sort of navigate between companies if that were to happen? Is that something that, once you're in that space, it's a little bit easier to understand how to navigate and, finding new jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. Once your foot is in the door, you kind of understand how things work. You tend to meet all the different groups, and now you know the difference between somebody who works in pharmacovigilance and somebody who works in medical affairs and somebody who works in market access and somebody who works in all these different areas. You can kind of see where your next move or your next step would be. So I think you would have checked that box of now I know how the industry works. I think I can learn a slightly different or a totally different disease area and apply that knowledge that you have to that new area. I think it's probably a lot easier once you're in there. But I worked at GlaxoSmithKline before coming over to a smaller company, UT, and you used to see that all the time. I saw that very, very frequently with a compound that would fail. You'd have a whole cohort of people that are like finding a new place and just kind of using those skill sets, transferable skill sets that have been developed, and applying them in kind of different ways, but much easier once you're already in there and you kind of understand the system.
I think in rare disease, sometimes it's hard to completely change therapeutic areas unless it's within, say, cardiology, a rare disease within cardiology or pulmonary. But like, I know I've changed therapeutic areas twice outside of cardiopulmonary. And, when you're given that opportunity, once you have, we all have a medical background, you can learn really any therapeutic area. It's just that, you have to, there are other skill sets that you also have to bring. Sometimes it's not that the company's worried that you can't learn that therapeutic area. They want you to have the other expertise within that job description. And sometimes they're really set on you having a solid background in their therapeutic area. I've seen it go kind of both ways. But I think Andrew's right. Once you have your foot in the industry and you make friends from, people from other companies, because your colleagues will go to other companies, and then, they will kind of alert you to an opportunity that they think is a good fit for you at their current company. So there's a lot of that too. We find, even at Gossamer, I find myself now with former Actelion colleagues and friends, which is nice. And Wasim, that's where, we knew each other before when he was a key opinion leader and I worked at Actelion, and then he came over and worked with us. So I've had the experience working with him in two different roles, really. So once you get to know people in different companies, it's really nice because you try to help each other out when you're trying to look for a new job or change jobs because your area was phased out, the company was bought out. It happens to everybody, I think, in the industry at least once, where you've taken a chance somewhere and it didn't work out, and you're kind of left with maybe 2 months of a package, and you need to find your next move.
I agree with everything that was said. Again, if you have at least 2 or 3 years experience in industry, that would be great. So if you're being restructured after that, it makes it easier. Not necessarily easy though, because again, depending on what your priorities are, depending which therapeutic area, which disease space you want to stay in or not, how much travel, depending on the role you're willing to do, where the company is located as well. I know remote work has been common in the COVID era, but not all companies want to hire remote, and there's probably more push for in-office work in the recent past. So you will need to compromise somewhere, whether the title, the salary, the location, the therapeutic area, the travel, so depending on your priorities.
That's great. Thank you, guys. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for our panelists about making the transition to industry, or just about grants and partnering with industry as a whole?
Yeah. While they're thinking of a question, just one other comment. It's really not the dark side that people talk about.
Yeah.
It's really the bright side. Great science, great people happen in industry. I know what you hear on the news from Congress people and senators. It's only the bad aspects of whatever happens in industry, but really it's a good place to be in. It serves patients.
I know. I think the common theme that I'm getting here is that you guys all wish you had done this sooner, except for you, Dr. Nelson, since you started out doing that. But no, that's great.
So for me, I don't know actually. First, there aren't any questions, right? So we can still talk, because I debate that every now and then. Should I have transitioned sooner? I do not know, because really clinical experience and building relationships did serve me well, I would say. So I'm not sure there's really a perfect time, whether fresh out of training. I would say if you're considering it, don't wait till your late 50s, because again, there's steep learning curve and a lot of experience to build your career. So don't delay it much. But I'm not sure there's a right answer, whether right out of training or education versus gaining real world experience.
I will say that's a good point, just because one of the reasons we like to bring in clinicians on occasion is, because of their clinical experience, and they can apply what we're trying to do to kind of clinical workflow or real practice. And I do think there's a huge advantage to having that information. So maybe not right out of school, but after a few years of experience, come in and try to apply that, because then you can use that information or that skill set as a leverage to get you in the door. I can put a link in the, since there were so many questions on investigator-initiated studies, do you mind if I put a link in the chat for people to click on? It kind of gives you more information about the stuff, just ours.
I think that's fine. Is that okay?
It's just our website.
Yeah.
Take a look at it or click on it or not if you don't want to.
Any other questions for anybody? We're almost at the hour. Well, thank you guys so much for joining again. We really appreciate your time. This was an incredibly instructive and helpful hour. I apologize again for the AV issues, but I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
so much.
Thank you. Thank
Have a
you.
good one. Take care.
Bye.